Hello everyone, welcome back to another exciting video of Botanopedia. From the thumbnail, I guess you have all guessed it what I am going to teach you today. Yes, today's topic is about phytoamphibians. I am Rohan, who will be working as a guide to guide you all through this video. Now, from the course of evolution, we have seen that the plant kingdom has been divided into two broad domains, cryptogams and phanerograms. Where the cryptogram domain consists of groups, different divisions like algae, fungi, pteridophytes, bryophytes, and phanerogams consist of angiosperms and gymnosperms. So, if we follow the course of evolution from algae to angiosperms, we would be seeing that the plant division is actually halfway from algae to angiosperms. So this division is known as bryophytes. They are actually halfway because we have seen that this is the kingdom, this is the domain, this is the division which has emerged from having a thalloid plant structure to an appendage-like structure having a stem axis with different leaves and other parts. Now, the word bryophytes is actually a derivation of two Greek words, bryon meaning moss and phyton meaning plants. Here, basically this division actually refers to the plant community which is referred to as mosses, actually roaming in your society, in your locality, while roaming around the streets, different places. You may have seen kind of very thin layer of grasses or a layer of green vegetation covering different rocks, different types of terrains. Actually those are mosses, and so these bryophytes are actually those mosses. Now, first of all, on the thumbnail I have written the name phytoamphibians. So why these bryophytes are known as the amphibians of the plant kingdom? Now actually there's a very specific reason for this thing. Now the reason is that this refers to the fact that they are generally terrestrial, but they are terrestrial plants. They actually grow, they sustain all through the life cycle in the land, but they require water for a very important phase of the life cycle, is that reproduction. They actually, while their sexual stage of reproduction, they have to produce their male antheridia, produces male spermatozoid, which requires water as a mode of communication and mode of transport. It travels short distances from the place of production to the place of fertilization. The distance may be very short, but it has to travel through water because they are not present at the same place. Now, first of all, talking about any plant kingdom, we must know that what type of conditions are favorable for that plant division to grow. For in case of bryophytes, the condition is moist. They require humid, wet conditions, moist conditions, for also maybe shady conditions which do not have much sunlight to actually sustain their life. Now, after a brief introduction of bryophytes, let's get into the general characteristics of bryophytes. Now, a first point which we would be mentioning about bryophytes is their life cycle. Their life cycle is actually divided into two broad phases. One is the gametophytic generation, which is actually predominant, and the sporophytic generation, which is short-lived. And actually it is dependent all through its life on the gametophytic plant body. Now, we have come across two different derivations, two different new terms, gametophyte and sporophyte. Now this actually, we can break this whole two words into two parts. For gametophyte, gameto meaning gametes and phyte meaning plant body. Now, after breaking, we find we can actually define the definition of a gametophyte, which refers it to be a haploid gamete producing plant body, referring to the sexual stage of the bryophyte life cycle. Now, what is the identifying features of this bryophyte, the gametophytic stage of this bryophytic life cycle, is that the gametophyte is actually and primarily a thalloid structure. Now, what is a thalloid? Thalloid, or more specifically a thallus, is a structure which is not distinguished into stem, leaves or branches or roots or anything. It is actually a very unorganized structure, a flat unorganized structure, and is not differentiated into many parts. So that is a thalloid. So basically a gametophytic plant body is actually thalloid. Or sometimes it may be erect. It sometimes may bear an erect axis. While going through the different classifications of bryophytic division, we would be seeing that different classes, different subclasses or orders of different classes of bryophytes have actually emerged a new advanced system of having a stem axis, which is divided or differentiated into stem and appendages. Now, it's the sporophyte. After studying the gametophyte, we will be learning about the sporophyte. Now, what is a sporophyte? A sporophyte is a diploid. It is actually, we read that the gametophyte produces gametes. What are gametes? Gametes are haploid, producing haploid spores. Now, so producing the haploid spores, the body needs to be haploid. So that was the haploid generation of the bryophytic life cycle, which produces male and female spores, which then fuse to form the zygote after fertilization. Now, this sporophyte is actually the spore producing diploid plant body. The spore producing plant body actually produces spores which germinate and grow into the gametophytic plant body. Now, this sporophyte is actually dependent and short-lived. It would be all throughout its life cycle, it would be actually dependent on the gametophyte for its nutrients. Now, I have written the sporophyte consists of a bulbous foot with or without an unbranched seta. What is a seta? Now, from the diagram I would be explaining what is a seta. See, this is the sporophyte and this is the gametophyte. So a bryophytic plant body is actually differentiated into the sporophyte and the gametophyte. Now, the sporophyte consists of the capsule. Now, this is actually the capsule or the sporogonium. The sporogonium is, what is a sporogonium or a sporangium? It is the organ that produces and stores the spores. So this part is actually the sporogonium or the sporangium producing part. Now, a sporangium, basically a very unique characteristics of bryophytes is that they are monosporangiate. Monosporangiate means they actually consist of a single unbranched sporangium, which consists of a single sporangium and hence is referred to as a sporogonium. Now, this sporogonium may sometimes have a capsule, a protective cap, which is known as the capsule, and this capsule consists of the sporogonium producing spores. Now, this is the seta, the long filament-like structure which gets connected with the capsule. Now this is the sporophyte. The sporophyte consists of these two parts. Now the gametophytic part consists of appendages, these are the leaves, and this is the stem axis, and these are nothing but called not roots. These are not roots. If you mistake, these are rhizoids. What is the difference between a rhizoid and a root? I would be teaching you later. Now, after studying about the sporophyte, let's study about the gametophytic generation in a bit more detail. I said you that gametophyte is a gamete producing plant body. Now, because it is gametophytic plant body, it produces gamete, it cannot produce a single type of gamete, because if it produces only a single type of gamete, it won't have any use. It will be producing one type of gamete, it cannot fuse, it cannot form a zygote, and so fertilization will not occur, and so there is no generation of the zygote. So the gametophyte has to produce two types of spores. Now for producing two types of spores, it requires two types of organs, the male and the female sex organs. So the gametophyte has male and female sex organs, which are referred to as the antheridium and the archegonium respectively, and the sexual reproduction is oogamous type, which means it produces oogametes. Okay, now the male sex organ is known as the antheridium. Now this is an antheridium, the diagrammatic representation of an antheridium of a particular bryophyte. Now see, this diagram of an antheridium, the LS of an antheridium, shows that it is actually made up of parenchymatous cells all throughout its structure. The structure is fully made up of parenchymatous cells. These are all parenchyma cells, and you will be seeing there is a one thin layer of jacket. This is the antheridium. This is the antheridium jacket. This is the jacket, which consists of androcytes. This is actually the jacket, and you have seen these blue colored spores present. These are called the androcytes. These are the androcytes. Now this is actually a particular type of development inside these. There may be androgonous, there may be androcyte mother cells, which then undergo meiosis, rather various meiotic stages to produce the androcytes, or these then develop into the spermatozoid, which is the sperm cell, which then travels to the egg and then fertilizes. After studying about the antheridium, we have to study about the archegonium, the female sex organ of the bryophytic life cycle, the gametophytic life cycle. Now the female sex organ is known as the antheridium and archegonium. Now the shape, can you understand? The shape of an archegonium actually looks like a vase, a flower vase. Now this shape is a flower vase structure, a flask shaped structure, or a vase shaped structure having a basal swollen venter. Now this is known as the venter, and this is the neck, or the neck. Now, as I said you, these are the parenchymatous cells, and this is nothing but the egg cell. Now the sperm will be traveling all through the neck inside to the egg cell and then fertilizing the egg cell. Now as I said you before, that the sperm has to travel for short distances using water to reach the archegonium, to reach inside, but after reaching the archegonium it needs to penetrate inside the neck venter cell of the female archegonium to reach the egg. For that, actually the neck's venter cells produces a type of slimy mucilage, which actually helps the sperm to be pulled down to the egg cell and then fertilized. Now the embryo, a very characteristic different feature of bryophytic gametophyte life cycle is that after the fertilization, the embryo does not go through the zygote does not go through any rest. It actually very rapidly develops into the embryo by a very beautiful phase or development stage, which is known as the exoscopic mode of development. What is the exoscopic mode of development? Now we have to understand that after the development of the zygote actually differentiates into two cell structure, a dyad stage. In the dyad stage, there are two different types of cells formed. One is the epibasal cell and one is the inner hypobasal cell. So the outer epibasal cell actually forms the outer structure, and the inner epibasal cell forms the inner structure of the upcoming sporophyte. So this is known as the exoscopic mode of development. Now I have said you before that of the structure rhizoids. So what are rhizoids? Now we know that any plant body has roots. What are the function of roots? Roots are actually the most important organ of a plant to absorb nutrients and water from the soil. Same feature for rhizoids. Rhizoids also serve as the same function as roots. They serve as anchorage to the substratum and also absorption of water and nutrients from the soil. So why are they called rhizoids? Now I have said you in the beginning that this is actually a course of evolution. So bryophytes are actually formed way before plants. Tracheophytes. So tracheophytes are referred to as all the different types of trees, trees, herbs, shrubs, etc. all known as tracheophytes. But before that came bryophytes. So bryophytes are much more before than tracheophytes. So at that time, rhizoids were actually prepared instead of roots. So roots actually are a kind of evolved structure to rhizoids. So rhizoids actually are very characteristic of having devoid of protoplasm at maturity. These rhizoids are actually devoid of protoplasm, and moreover, these rhizoids actually look way more simpler than roots. If I see the picture of this rhizoid, you will be seeing that these rhizoids look like very tiny roots formed in kind of seedlings. If you germinate a seedling, you will be seeing a thin kind of white colored roots coming out from the seedling. Those roots are very similar to these rhizoids. Now, rhizoids are actually of two types. If you see two different types of classes of bryophytes, you will be seeing that there are different types of rhizoids present, and those have particular function. So these major two types of rhizoids are smooth-walled rhizoids and tuberculate rhizoids. Now smooth-walled rhizoids actually do not have they have a very smooth wall, smooth inner wall, but they actually are devoid of protoplasm. As you know, these both type of rhizoids are actually devoid of protoplasm. But one important difference between the smooth walled rhizoids and tuberculate. Why are they called tuberculate? Because they actually consist of peg-like or very flat-like thorn-like structures in the inner layer of rhizoids, and those actually differentiate them from smooth-walled rhizoids. Now, after learning about these general characteristics of rhizoids, two important characteristics are actually need to be mentioned. Now, these two characteristics are bryophytes they do not have any xylem tissue. They are devoid of any xylem tissue. You know what is a xylem vessel? Xylems are the conductive tissue of any plant. So xylem vessels or tissue is absent. What is present is lignin conductive tissue. All throughout the body, this parenchymatous lignin conductive body or tissue actually absorbs water and nutrients from the soil. And last but not the least feature of bryophytes is the, I have said you in the beginning that sporophytic is actually the asexual stage, but actually that is wrong. Asexual stage of the plant is actually devoid or absent. Asexual stage is absent. So these two features are last but not least features of bryophytes. Now after studying about the general characteristics, now let's actually rewind and understand what is the life cycle of a bryophyte. So the bryophytic life cycle starts from the gametophytic generation. So the gametophytic generation consists of two types of male and female sex organs, Antheridium and Archegonium. They produce two types of gametes. Now these gametes fuse to undergo fertilization to form the zygote. Now after the zygote does not go through any kind of rest. It actually immediately starts developing into the embryo. And how the embryo develops? By form of exosporic mode of development. This exosporic mode of development is nothing but how after the development of the zygote divides into two types of a diet stage, which consists of the epibasal and the hypobasal cell, and then the quadrant embryo, then the embryo sporophyte. Now the sporophytic generation is the diploid generation, or the sporophyte. The sporophytic generation is the diploid generation. Now I must say that the sporophyte, the spore producing mother cell of the sporophyte, when produces a spore, a spore is the first stage of the gametophytic generation, because the spore is actually the first stage of the gametophytic generation, because the spore after germination actually produces the gametophytic or the haploid generation of the bryophytic life cycle. Now after the production of the germination of the sporophyte, this would be forming the germination, and then it will be developing the gametophytic. Now after studying about the bryophytes in general, let's learn about the classification of bryophytes. Now the term bryophyta, let's go through a brief history of the classification of the bryophyta system. The bryophyta was first coined by Ian Brown in 1864. He included algae, fungi, lichens and mosses together. But due to the distinctive characteristics, the members of mosses and their allied members like liverworts and hornworts, Skimper in 1879 separated them into two broad classes, Bryophyta as a different rank, and the other places like the algae, the fungi and the lichens were actually combined into a different class known as the Thallophyta. Now Eckler then divided in 1883 that they were divided, the Bryophyta system was divided into two separate classes, Hepaticae, which is now known as Hegapeticopsida. They were divided into Hepaticae and Musci, which is now known as Bryopsida. So Musci and Hepaticae. Now this Engler recognized the orders in two classes, and each class was further divided into three orders. Now most other scientists like Bensey and any other scientists followed these twofold divisions of Bryophyta as proposed by Eckler in 1883. But another scientist named Cavers in 1910 divided this Bryophyta into 10 groups. Now this Bryophyta division was divided into 10 groups, different 10 groups, out of which the Antherocetotales was placed in the Hepatica by earlier scientists in spite of its distinct characteristic features. Out of these 10 separate classes, these Antherocetotales were placed inside Hepatica class, irrespective of its distinct characteristic features. Now lastly in 1899, Ho named a scientist for the first time recognized Antherocetotales as the distinct order from the remaining members of the class Hepaticae and raised it to a status of a different separate class. Lastly, after different scientists, Bryophyta came to be divided into Hepaticae, Antherocetotae and Musci. Later, under the International Code of Botanical Nomenclature (ICBN nomenclature), their names changed to Hepaticopsida, Antheroseropsida and Bryopsida. Nothing much. But lastly, it is the latest division goes by Proskior in 1957, who did not do much of any different thing. He just changed the name of Antheroseropsida to Antheroceratopsida. So this is the latest classification of bryophytes. Now they are divided, as I said, into 3 different classes: Hepaticopsida, Antheroceratopsida and Bryopsida. Now Hepaticopsida are known as liverworts. Why they are liverworts? Because they have a liver-like body, which is known as thallus and leafy. The leaves are arranged in 2 or 3 rows, lobed and always nerveless. They do not have any midrib or vein. The sporophyte, as I said, is delicate and short-lived, which is a very common feature of all other classes. But when we go to Bryopsida, we see that the sporophyte is strong and is long-living, not as of Antheroceropsida and Hepaticopsida. So the capsules are globose or ellipsoid and brown or black in color. What are capsules? Capsules are the spore-bearing structures like the sporangiums, which cover the sporangiums, the capsules. Now seta, the filament-like structure holding the capsule, is very delicate, translucent or transparent, and the sporogenous structures, the sporogenous cells which produce the spores, are actually the endothecial in origin. Examples are Riccia species and Merkensia. Now moving on to the second class, which are known as the Antheroceratopsida, or in common the name is given to as hornworts. The gamete is thalloid. The sporophyte is very strong but not lasting for several weeks. It is a bit more than Hepaticopsida. Capsules are needle-shaped and green in color. The seta is absent. The capsules are not present on a seta. They are not present on a seta. Seta is absent, and the sporogenous cells are amphithecial in origin. They were endothecial in origin, now they are amphithecial in origin. Example is Anthoceros. Now lastly, let's go to the last class of Bryophyta. This is the Bryopsida, which are known as mosses. The most common community of Bryophytes are mosses. The most largest community of Bryophytes. These are mosses. Characteristics are gametophyte is leafy. Leaves are arranged radially with distinct nerve, which was absent in both Antheroceratopsida and Hepaticopsida. Leaves are arranged radially with distinct nerves. Sporophytes are strong and long-living. Capsules are variable shape. They are variable in shape. They are not globose or ellipsoid. They are variable in shape. There is presence of a seta, which is strong, green in color. And lastly, the sporogenous cells, which produce spores, which develop into the spore-producing cells, are endothecial in origin, same as that of Hepaticopsida. Example is Sphagnum and Funaria and many other species, but the main example is Sphagnum and Funaria. Now in the next video, we will be learning about the different classes in detail.